All right, good morning, Coach. Happy to be here. Excited about this cast.
Too. It's been a while. We have a guest today, folks.
Yeah, I know.
Today,
it might be a little rusty.
It could be a little rusty, but that's okay. It's July 13th, the year 2023. Welcome aboard, everybody. You listen to the Crushing Iron podcast, and this is episode 699.
Yeah, you realize that's one away from 700 podcasts.
I'm aware. I'm not the greatest at math, but that is one of the things that I was able to surmise before we started today. That's one from 700. I don't know that we have anything special planned. I will say, like a couple weeks ago when we did our big Q&A, there was a lot of great feedback or suggestions of the podcast we did. I think it's been like a year or two ago, where we wrote down 3 or 4 questions to ask each other, and we quizzed ourselves. Maybe we could do that again for 700. People seem to like that. But there's always plenty of things to talk about. But yeah, it's just 700. It's just a number. We'll celebrate it for all of about 63 minutes, the length of the podcast, and move on to the next one.
Yeah, that's how we do. It's no big. It's just one day at a time, man.
One day at a time. And we'll introduce our guests here in a minute. But it's first time tuning in today. Welcome. We appreciate you giving us your time. We know you have quite a lot of options in the triathlon podcast universe and just podcasts in general. It is very valuable, so we appreciate you tuning in today. We cover it all. We do swim, bike, and run specific podcasts. We do race recaps and also all race previews. But for the most part, Mike and I, as coaches, athletes, best friends, we just sit back, relax, have an open, honest discussion about what we're going through in life, not just as human beings, but also as coaches and athletes ourselves. Mike and I also work with a wide range of athletes all across the globe, from beginner level triathletes looking for your first 5K or sprint triathlon, all the way up through elite level amateurs trying to get back to world championships, and everyone in between from all over the globe. And we'll use the feedback loop we have at them and Training Peaks, emails, text messages, and the like to drive the discussion today. We also frequently utilize our Facebook group. You can search that, Crushing Iron Group. Answer one simple question. We'll let you right in. Awesome people, fantastic community, solid resource in a sport that is oftentimes way overcomplicated and way too confusing. We offer a clarity version of that space to get great feedback, answer some of your questions from, again, experienced athletes who have been there and done it, and always willing to pitch in. So don't be a lurker, participate. And that's it. We don't do ads. We don't do sponsors. And we honestly rarely ever do guests, except for today. Yeah. But that's it. But the agenda that we do have is to keep you happy and healthy in your endurance sports journey.
Which I always like that agenda, actually.
I mean, it is agenda. I mean, you can't lie. Everyone says we don't have an agenda. We do. Like our agenda. And the reason we started this was, I think, honestly and authentically, to keep you and I happy and healthy in communicating and talking about a sport that we love. And as we talk and communicate that, help us work through life and talk about things. And we've, realized along the way that, a lot of athletes can relate to that. But yeah, we do have an agenda, and it's an important one. And happy and healthy is you see that tagline a lot now, though, happy and healthy. But, we weren't one of the first, but we were definitely one of the first, like a couple 100,000 to use that phrase.
And it's just starting to work for me, too. So after 699 podcasts, I'm feeling pretty happy and healthy.
Yeah, I can tell, man. You got a little, I can feel and I can hear the glimmer in your eye.
And today we got a guy who's going to solve the magical mystery and for everyone else. No pressure, buddy.
Yeah, no pressure. So we have on today Dr. Alex Harrison. I've been following him for probably a year or two, and recently found and tried out the app that he created. It's called Saturday. It's a fueling and hydration app for athletes. And I used it with never having spoken to Alex, never having communicated with him. And just, I'm always looking for a way to do things better, not just for myself, but for the athletes we work with. A lot of times, as coaches, we use ourselves as guinea pigs before we, would even try anything out on our athletes. And so I used it, and then I kind of popped into it and honestly immediately fell in love with it. I've been as you guys know on the podcast, we don't do sponsors. We get interview requests and guest stuff weekly. Can we be on your podcast? Can we be in your podcast? We're like, no. But what we do want is to invite people on that we think can benefit our listeners and then provide value, not, interviewing a, professional triathlete to hear about how a, 23-year-old single person who trains 45 hours a week does, but somebody like Alex that can hopefully help solve a lot of your problems. And so I used this app for, I think, 2 or 3 weeks, used it for the race that I did that went well, and just, again, immediately fell in love with it as a lifelong first endurance product user who has always been very much about them. I started using his home, the product you can make at home. He'll go into all that. But anyway, posted to our Facebook group, our internal one for just our athletes, had a bunch of athletes use it. They gave great feedback. Oh my gosh, this thing is great. It's so simple. I didn't know how much I was under fueling. And then, I think from a back and forth you and Summer had, I was like, hey, will you hop on a Zoom call? And, first and foremost, for a guy that's basically bootstrapping his own company, his customer service is outstanding. And he got back. And anyway, we were able to schedule a Zoom call in 48 hours. He hopped on a Zoom call with our athletes, answered a ton of questions, had a ton of great feedback. And so obviously the next step from that was, let's get him out to the masses, because I'm sure a lot of people haven't heard of him, haven't heard of the app itself. And one of the biggest things as coaches that we talk about and hear about is, how much do I drink? When do I drink? How much sodium do I need? How many carbohydrates do you need? All these things. And there's a bunch of, general, places you can go to get feedback. There's way too many products to choose from. There's way too much push from, professional athletes and sponsorships and commercials that really, I think most athletes just need a very simplistic way to know what they need to take, not on a general time frame of, months or for a specific race, but every single day for every single workout. And that is what his app provides. So before I would want to let you intro yourself. We'll do a few questions, but really, really happy to have you here. And I know you're very, very busy with a lot of things in life, but Dr. Alex Harrison, I appreciate you giving us your time today.
Robbie, that was extremely generous of an intro there. I'm really happy to be here. I had no idea that you guys didn't regularly do guests, so I feel very fortunate to be on. We do. I think maybe approach the nutrition problem from a different way than a lot of folks in the nutrition industry, because my wife and I are coaches first, like you guys. So yeah, I think we also recognize that the tech in sport is really complicated. There's a lot of tracking, a lot of analytics, a lot of data to get stuck in, and syncing issues and all of that. And we wanted to create something that cut through the nutrition noise using tech, but didn't make it complicated. So totally personalized, but also, really uncomplicated. And it ends up saving people money too, which is pretty cool.
Before we get into the questions, and Mike, I'll let you toss the first question into him. But before we go into that, give us a little bit of your background, how you got into this, where you went to school, what your interests were, and kind of what led you up to the point of creating the Saturday app itself.
Yeah, I come from probably a very unique background in triathlon because I went to school primarily obsessively focusing on strength and power sports for about 10 years until the very end of my PhD program. And I started focusing on fueling endurance because I recognized how critical it was for especially newer endurance athletes to get fueling right, to be able to fall in love with and really enjoy the sport over the long term. Triathlon was always sort of my what I considered was going to be my retirement sport after I was done with my professional bobsledding career, and before that decathlon. But yeah, while I was in my PhD program, also a PhD program in sport physiology and performance, I was also on Team USA for bobsledding. But I always had in the back of my mind that I was going to be doing triathlon and cycling at some point. And yeah, once my bobsled career was over, I moved into triathlon with Michelle, my wife, who is a pro triathlete and professional level cyclist. And so I had used her as a guinea pig for years, testing. We together had tested things because she's also got a master's degree in sports science and is a registered dietitian and board certified sports dietitian. So this is kind of all we talk about in house. But yeah. Really diverse background, swam in high school, track and field, baseball, tennis. Pretty much run the gamut of all the sports. But now triathlon is the love.
That's awesome. I love it. You know, I watched a clip from you, and you had mentioned something about there was a trend in the 80s or 90s for people to just, you know, pick up a gallon of water and just start drinking it and everything like that. And I'm not a techie guy, and I'm a go by feel type of person in general. And I fell for that. Well, I don't want to say fell for it. I'm glad I've always drank a lot of water first, but there was something in there about, the thing of it is like hydration equals water, but with sodium or salt. And I just want to start there because I think a lot of people may have that confused when you think about the word hydration, and they don't necessarily equate it. A lot of people, I'm sure that, obviously a lot of people do, but many don't equate it with the idea of mixing it with sodium. And I just want you to start there to talk about why that's so important. And also, is there bad sodium?
Totally. So I'm not sure that there's bad sodium, but there's definitely too much sodium and too little sodium. Both of those do exist. And I think most people operate on the side of too little sodium. Most people that are probably listening to this podcast operate on the side of too little sodium. Certainly large swaths of America operate on the side of maybe a little bit too much sodium and too much a lot of other things too. But most of the listeners here are probably of the mind that hydration, equals water. And maybe there should be a little sodium too. But truly, sodium is what helps your body retain the water. If you're consuming, that's what we want. We want the water retained in your bloodstream so that you can have good blood volume for good cardiac output, for good oxygen delivery to your muscles. If you drink water absent sodium, essentially what you end up doing is washing out the sodium, reducing your sodium concentration of your blood, and then water will follow that as your body, water will follow that out of you through urine output, which will decrease your blood volume, which makes you worse at endurance and worse at sport.
So what I'm hearing you say, and before we get into the weeds, maybe towards the ends, about how the ins and outs of the app itself and how the athletes can use it for not just training but also racing. One of the biggest questions we always get from athletes we work with, athletes that are in our closed Facebook group, and really everywhere you look, right, on message boards and race specific, Facebook groups or what have you, is, how do I know, right? How much do I know? And one of the things that, and I told you before the podcast today, that I've recognized with the athletes that we work with that have been using your app, is they have found how unbelievably underhydrated they are, or they have been during their races for years, right? And a lot of them have used, you can do like a one-off and do like a, quote unquote sweat test, or you can do a consultation, right, with a an online, exercise, nutritionist or sports nutritionist, and kind of get, a feel for where you need to be. But most of them have said that they aren't taking in near enough water over the course of, and I think a lot of people it's being highlighted right this time of year, regardless of where you live, because it's so insanely hot that it's almost impossible to keep up with, fluid intake, but not just the fluid piece, but also the sodium and how important that is, and also the carbohydrates and how you do that. So if you could go into a little bit of, and you know what, I don't want to wait until the end to kind of go through the app, but I want you to talk a little bit about the makeup of an athlete, maybe athlete A, and what determines their needs, and maybe give an example to the athletes that are listening, maybe a long course athlete, a short course athlete, but some of the pitfalls you see, and then how that can, if they're underhydrated, taking in way too few or way too little sodium, and then how their performance is negatively impacted by that, and then maybe some corrective measures they would see by getting it done right.
Yeah, totally. So I think it's important to understand a lot of the messaging that we hear, a lot of the things you'll read online. There's a history and a flow to all of this that I think helps people frame all of what they're reading and hearing online. And I think basically the first wave back in like the 70s, 80s, 90s was, we need to hydrate. Everybody recognized we need to hydrate, and they were right, totally right. We need to hydrate. And Gatorade jumped on that bandwagon and pushed hydration really hard. And so we all learned that hydration was important. And then people started dying because of hyponatremia. And that's when people realized, oh, we can't actually overhydrate. And so if you take an average athlete who genuinely needs to consume maybe a liter or 1.2 liters per hour during a relatively sweaty activity or a race, if you have that person drink 1 to 1.2 liters per hour and don't have them supplement sodium with it, you're going to be pushing them into, at the very least, subclinical hyponatremia, which is totally what happened in the early 2000s, which is why it might seem to a lot of folks newer to the, like, new-ish to triathlon. Like, if you came to triathlon between 2000 and 2015, it might seem like the water recommendations that our app recommends are really high, because what happened between 2000 and 2015 is there was this big push, like, stop drinking so much so that you don't die, basically, so that we don't dysregulate your blood sodium concentration. What we've learned now is basically that you don't have to not drink so much. You should still drink and replace the sweat that you're losing, replace the water that you're losing through sweat by drinking, but you have to do it with much higher sodium concentrations than in your fluid intake than what is found in most sports drinks, because most sports drinks aren't designed for Ironman triathlon or 3 or 4 hour sessions that are super sweaty. You can lose 2 liters of water per hour really easily. Like a 175-pound person could very easily lose 2 liters of water per hour on like a 3-hour run.
Whoa.
And so if you're not replacing at least a liter per hour, but probably closer to 1.2, maybe even 1.5 liters per hour, you will incur the performance decrement of dehydration, which is cardiac drift, increased effort level for pace. You generally stop being able to absorb carbohydrates. Pretty much everything goes bad when you get dehydrated. But if you replace that water amount without sodium, you end up subclinically hyponatremic, or sometimes clinically hyponatremic, meaning like risk of death. You have all sorts of symptoms like swollen fingers, swollen legs, extreme thirst, ironically. And yeah, taking in more sodium, like 1,000 milligrams per liter of water, or even 1,200 or 1,400 milligrams of sodium per liter of water, pretty much fixes that and reduces the risk of cramping, hyponatremia, and all of the overhydration type risks to zero.
Wow. Yeah, I think I'm a victim of that extreme thirst sometimes, and I wonder, and it's kind of ironic because I've been talking about this on the podcast for a long time, but one of my favorite books over the last 30 years is called You're Not Sick, You're Thirsty. Have you heard of that book?
I hadn't, no.
Okay, well, it's the guy who, a lot of it was about salt and water, and of course he had iodine in there too, but it's just for general health purposes. And his whole point was that salt mixed with water is your energy, the body's energy and stuff like that. And so I've always been on board with that, but I think sometimes I under sodium myself in races, and I definitely have a peeing problem on the bike a lot. And I just wondered, like, first of all, why do you think that's happening? And second, is there, I think I heard you mention something about coffee. It's not necessarily, it is a diuretic, but it's just because you drink so much fluid and it doesn't have the salt with it. Is there a way to, like, set up your race day, for example, in the morning? Because I know a lot of people have similar issues as far as like what to eat, maybe how to set the tone for your gut for the race day, so you don't maybe have to end up going to the bathroom a lot during the race.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things that we're going to be adding to the app soon, is this feedback chat system. It's actually going to be an AI system that I'm building right now. And one of the things that it will include is a conversation about how often are you peeing, and like if you're peeing more often than you think you should be, if you're peeing like every 45 minutes, or like maybe you're peeing 3 times in a half Ironman bike and you're like, that feels like excessive. Or maybe it's just it's like a long training ride and you don't want to be stopping to go to the bathroom more than once or ever. It will help customize how much sodium you intake, because the reason most folks end up producing more urine than they should is because they consume too little sodium with the fluid intake that they're taking in. If you're consuming a liter per hour, or like 1.2 liters per hour, or even maybe 700 mils, that's like, what is that, 20, let's just switch to ounces here, 24 ounces of water to 32 ounces of water per hour. and you have a relatively low sodium intake of maybe 100, 200, 300 milligrams per hour, you will probably end up producing a lot of urine, and you're basically taking the water from your blood, pushing it through your kidneys instead of through your heart, and then it goes into your bladder and out. And that's lost performance because you didn't consume closer to 1,000 milligrams per liter of sodium.
That's fascinating to me as a coach and as an athlete specifically, because I think everyone gets so caught up in the individual specifics of nutrition, exactly how many carbs, exactly how much sodium, and how much water, and they treat them almost as individuals, not what kind of carbohydrates, what kind of glucose are you putting into your body, what kind of sodium are you choosing to use? And let's be honest, most athletes have no idea, right? They pick up a product that they see their friend, Bobby Joe using at the pool, and they're like, you know what, that'll work for me. And then they buy a product, and we went through this on the Zoom where, some companies, make products, and not everything, and it's shocking with America, not everything you need in that powder is useful, right? It doesn't have to be taken in, right? It's not something that's going to actually improve performance. It's more of a filler. Or, I joke with some athletes a lot that, nothing you can buy at Costco pre-made is going to help you, right? Gatorade or, Body Armor or these things that athletes think they're going to, they're sports hydration drinks, but they're not doing anything. And so just like you can't look at triathlon as swim only, as, 3 different disciplines, you have to look at them collectively. What I hear you saying is you have to look at the cause and effect and how each amount of carbohydrates, sodium, and water complement each other, because if you get the ratio off, then it's going to have more of a negative effect than it will a positive effect. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, totally. There's absolutely an interplay between carb amounts, sodium amounts, and fluid intake amounts. And I like to think of it in terms of hourly amounts. And yeah, if you're super high on one and low on something else, it probably doesn't match your training very well. And unfortunately, it is a complex problem to solve, which is why we built the app. It doesn't have to be complex in implementation. Like, it doesn't have to be a complex experience for people day to day. It can be made simple, but there just wasn't a simple way to make the math simple without building an app. If there was, I would have just made a calculator and posted it online. And there are companies that do that. And unfortunately, they miss a lot of individualization, and they miss a ton of granularity and difference between training sessions and races, and like, what's the difference between a 90-minute run at an aerobic pace and a 4-hour ride with intervals in the first 2 hours? There's a lot of nuance to it that can be made really easy with some complex algorithms in the back end and a nice, easy to use interface in the front. There's a huge interplay between the 3: carbs, sodium, and water.
Yeah. So I did have your app, and I went through it, and the other day, I really it's interesting because you put in what maybe you're using now, which for me was Scratch. And it was like it couldn't get enough sodium in there, right? There's always that. You adjust how many scoops and everything like that, and it always tells you how much sodium and sugar, I guess, to put in with it.
Yep.
And it's really difficult to get this. So the sodium piece of that is very interesting. That you're always kind of arguing. I think that most people don't get enough sodium, no matter how many scoops they put in, because of the ratio probably. So I just want to talk. I guess we could maybe shift a little bit in the sense of, I want to talk to you personally about the difference between solid foods and like a gel or something like that.
You stole my next question.
Oh, I did?
Unbelievable. No, I got the backup. Go ahead.
That's a really important question, and it's a super common one. I think the longer the event goes, people start to feel like they need more solid food the longer the duration of their activity. It's sort of easy to psychologically deal with, okay, I'm going to drink sugar water for 3 hours during this intense thing, but if I'm going to go on an epic 8 hour or like race day, it's the 12th hour of my race. Do I need some solid food to like stay alive? Can I really live off of liquid nutrition for that long? Or does it matter the difference between gels and chews and bars or like homemade solids? All those questions are really, really hot topics. And the short answer is the easiest thing for your gut is the best thing during exercise, especially during something really long and usually in a warm climate like an Ironman. There are cold weather Ironmans, but I think most races are pretty warm, and so dehydration is a real risk. And when dehydration is present, gut function goes down. A hydrated gut is a well-functioning gut, and if you're dehydrated systemically, your gut is less hydrated. The way that works is your blood normally at rest there's a lot of blood in your gut, and it makes it really good at functioning, which is why you can down pizza and beer and your gut handles it all. But when you're exercising, your muscles need some of that blood that was in your gut, and your skin needs some of that blood, and you're losing fluid from that blood out through sweat. And when that happens, your gut no longer has enough blood to function well, and so solids become much more challenging for your gut to process. If you're finding that you are digesting solids really well, that's great. Definitely consume water with it, or you will find that you're going to stop digesting solids really well really soon. If you're finding that your gut is not responding well to like homemade treats or bars, or like they make solid chews, like Scratch has chews, and I think lots of companies actually have those little blocks. If you need to move in the direction from homemade treats to bars to chews to gels to liquid nutrition, sort of in that order, from like hardest on the gut to easiest on the gut. Liquid nutrition will always be the easiest thing for your gut to process.
So by what I guess what I'm hearing you saying is, if you can, as an athlete, 70.3 even up to a full to a degree, I would guess, is, because a lot of athletes will say, I have to have solid food. And a lot of times, I'll say, you don't have to, you want to, right? A lot of it's personal preference. I need to have something to chew on. And I think a lot of it also is because many of the products that are made are so sweet that people like to have something to kind of offset that. But what I hear you saying is that, ideally, from an absorption standpoint, it's easiest on your body and your gut, which obviously makes performance easier, is to get as close as you can to doing it all liquid, regardless, of the distance, maybe up to a full.
Yeah, totally. And even beyond full Ironman, I've had athletes do 24-hour events on all liquid nutrition, and it works really well. The pitfalls that people run into, and some of them aren't even pitfalls, but they are that they'll underconsume, and so they get hungry, and it feels like when you're hungry, you've got to have something solid. And if you're hungry during exercise, it's because you've underconsumed, usually by a lot, because there's really strong signaling in the body during exercise to block hunger. So if that hunger is breaking through, you're probably like hours behind on the amount of carbohydrate that you should have been intaking. And you might be hours behind on the carbohydrate you should have been intaking because you've been dehydrated and can't absorb the stuff anyway. So you're limited on what you can consume. The other thing is, like, not only is placebo real, and performance enhancement happens through placebo. So if you like solid food and that's your jam, you should do that if you can absorb it. But like psychophysiology beyond just placebo is a big deal. Like this is like an emerging field of research. And during sport performance, when your psychology is very, very challenged, the relationship between psychology and physiology is really strong. So if you are finding yourself more joyful, enjoying yourself more, like just relishing in the experience because you're chewing down some tasty chews or like eating salty pretzels, and that's like bringing you more joy while you're out there killing it, then definitely do that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's really good. You're talking my language now, the sort of mental game of everything. But I think, for me, when I've always kind of been, I do everything on the bike, but one of my main sources has always been Cliff Bars or something like that. And I think for me, it's probably because maybe I'm just guessing here, but you tell me, it's sort of a slower thing, and it's a little bit more of a safer, in a sense, way to go about it, because it doesn't hit me as hard, and it's sort of more of a slower burning situation versus if I screw up my liquid nutrition, that can really have more of a sort of a powerful impact. Like the other day, I was kind of I did a ride on my trainer, and then I went out for about a 30-minute run, and about halfway through that run, I was like, I didn't have any food or any solids, and I was just like super hypoglycemic kind of feeling. So I don't know if that's kind of like what happens if you're not, and maybe it was low sodium, I don't know, but like that's what I think my fear has always been, is that if I try to liquid it out and I'm not really dialed into my pace and effort and everything's right on point, it's going to be harder. And I think like solids for me just feel safer. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, totally. And that's where companies like UCAN and Cliff Bars, that like where there's some fiber, some fat, or some slower digesting carbs, that's you are their target market. Folks who want a slightly like safer approach where they can go 30 to 45 minutes without consuming. Like that run scenario that you said is a perfect example of if you're going to do liquid nutrition and then take a gap in your consumption for 30 minutes or more, you may find that you will come down. The trade-off is, and when I say come down, I mean hypoglycemic, neurogenic hypoglycemia. It feels terrible. You're hungry, you're shaky, you're like irritable, extra sweaty. It just feels awful. Low energy, of course. Typical term might be hangry, or that you need a Snickers. Yeah, if you have a gap in your liquid nutrition, and you're using fast carbs exclusively, or like glucose and fructose, you are more likely to experience hypoglycemia. The trade-off of doing all, or even some solids or some slow carb sources, the trade-off is you will, by definition, limit how much your gut can process. So you will limit the hourly rate of carbohydrate that you can consume. So if you're going to incorporate bars or something like a starch in your fluid mix, you might only be able to consume 70 grams or 80 grams of carbs per hour. And so you're leaving some performance on the table, but if your gut can tolerate it well, it can be an acceptable strategy to give you more time between consumptions, so that you only have to consume every 35 minutes before you really need to get something else on board.
That's a perfect segue into where I wanted to go next, because there's so many schools of thought, right, and how you should fuel, the way you should fuel, and how many carbohydrates you should try to take in per hour. Some people are on the minimal side, taking as little as possible, so much easier on your gut, and a lot of people are train it to go as high as you possibly can. I think if you've been in the sport for as long as I have, it's always been, it's kind of goes in phases, right? Sometimes as little as possible, sometimes it's as much as possible, and always kind of goes up and down and up and down and up and down. And so where do you kind of stand on that? Because I think a lot of athletes, when they hear train your gut, I think they hear train it to just take in whatever is possible, and not maybe the right amount, and then how you should scale that on a controlled level, right? Because I think a lot of it train your gut, and they try to take in 3 bottles of, double serving EFS in an hour, and they think that's training their gut, and they're actually not, and they're also decreasing their performance because it's way too much to take in. Is there a best way to do that? What are kind of some best practices? Because that is a term we hear a lot, train your gut. And then also, there's always an argument about, the biggest argument you'll hear is kind of the similar one to, how many grams of protein can your body absorb in an hour? You got the protein shakes that are like 55 grams of protein per serving. And, I would say it's borderline impossible for anyone to absorb all that in a single serving in an hour, and the rest is just waste. So where do you stand on that, on the, how many grams of carbohydrates can be tolerated per hour, and how athletes should work their way up to that level?
Yeah, really important question, and I'm totally with you on seeing that sort of up and down, up and down, up and down in the messaging that we see in the media and just between athletes over the years. Um, it's totally driven by somebody wanting to sell you something, and there's truth to every single one of those arguments. Well, there's truth to like 95% of those arguments. Some amount of truth. I think the literature is really, really clear that for performance optimization on race day, a higher carb approach, as high as gut tolerance allows, is absolutely the best. But gut tolerance is determined by how long the race is, how dehydrated you're going to be, how much thermal stress you're going to be under, how intense the race is, how stochastic or pulsatile or like up and down your power efforts need to be during the race. So super high carb, it might be 70 grams per hour for something extremely thermally stressed and very pulsatile, short, high intensity, or it might be 130 grams of carbs per hour for something that lasts 10 hours. And you can do it at a really steady pace and is in a cool environment. There's no thermal stress. There's no like ongoing dehydration or cumulative dehydration as you approach the end of the race. And yes, you can totally train your gut. But that doesn't mean, as you alluded to about the 3 scoops of EFS, you don't need to be training your gut like years in advance. You can actually train your gut just on some of your long sessions, and then in the couple weeks before, you should probably have high carbs in most of your long sessions if you want them to be optimized for performance, and most of your hard sessions too. But for your easier sessions, you can go lower carb, like 30 or 60 grams of carbs, or even 20 grams of carbs. For shorter, easier sessions. And those are hourly rates, 20, 30, 40, 60. But for longer sessions, probably, most folks, even very small body size folks, should be targeting 100, 90 grams of carbs per hour. And larger folks who can output the power and have, especially taller folks who might have more ability to absorb through longer gut systems, basically, could easily target 130, 140, 150 grams of carbs per hour. And so the means of training the gut is basically you need to expose the gut to high carbs, and whether you do that through your long and hard sessions throughout the year, or you do that in the month or so leading up to your big race, your gut will adapt over time and grow more receptors to fructose and glucose. So you'll be able to absorb both of those at a higher rate during exercise. And where that really, really pays off is in a dehydrated state. You'll have a higher capacity to absorb still because you've had those sort of receptors in reserve, and you've not been at your gut limits the whole race because you've trained your gut to intake more.
Wow, that's interesting because you're telling us that we always talk about training your gut and like, dialing in nutrition or whatever, or as early as possible. And are you saying that it's a good practice to always, every single workout? Cause I think it's easy to just kind of get on the trainer and just throw some water on there or whatever, and maybe grab a chew or something and go with it. But it makes sense in the long run. Cause what you're saying, it builds your gut up in a way that it will be ready. If you're practicing that type of thing on just daily workouts, almost like really being religious about it, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, totally. And you'll get more out of your training by operating consistently with a well-trained gut. You'll just have better training intensity, training quality, and maybe most importantly, better recovery from each training session, because that tail end of your intra-workout nutrition serves as your first line post-workout recovery stuff. So yeah, definitely. There are very few cases where I would recommend 0 carbs during a workout.
Got it. There's something you said in there, talking about the recommendations during an event in terms of it's going to be a steady event, right? Like you said, like a long, easy 4-hour ride versus a ride where you might, ride hard at the beginning, and the demands of what you need to take in to meet the demands your body is putting out. And I see this a ton with athletes. It's something that I think we even touched on in the Zoom call from a nutrition and a fueling and, a glycogen standpoint is how a lot of athletes come into longer course races, 70.3s and fulls specifically, probably a little bit undertrained when it comes to the swim. And their day is built around more of a steady state, zone 2, fat oxidation, low to mid aerobic, get quote unquote game plan. But that is almost immediately thrown out the window in the swim, where most athletes, whether it's for survival or over swimming or get caught up in the moment, immediately start a day that's supposed to be low to mid aerobic, right? And that's how they judge and plan their fueling day or not plan their fueling day. And instead they have this huge surge at the beginning, the very, very beginning, right? And, regardless of what they've taken or not taken in before the swim, before the day, how does that impact things? And because just going back to what you said about, a surgy type day, right? It's like I can just think about, watching the Tour de France the last week and a half. You got, so many surges and all the things. How does that play in? And what are some considerations you should have as an athlete when looking at your fueling for a legit, kind of a training day that's just simple, easy zone 2 versus one that's going to have some spikes, some intensity, right? So you're going out of, going into zone 3, zone 4. How do those things impact each other?
Really, really good question. Yeah. The more spiky, the more pulsatile, and the more, the less you're warmed up when you hit that intensity. Like imagine standing there cooling down before your swim in line to get in the water. And then all of a sudden we're at like VO2 max for a minute and then threshold for the next 20 minutes. And then maybe settle into like high aerobic at the end of it once you're dog tired. At least that was my experience. That sort of punch it from the gun drives huge carb burning, exclusively carb burning, and a ton of fatigue, of course, too, which basically means you need to be consuming carbs before the swim in your warm up for the swim. So if there's a swim warm up, you should have something on the beach with you, consuming carbs, water, sodium in the pre-swim and like while you're in line with your wetsuit on. And then you should definitely have a higher amount of carbohydrates during the bike than you would for an identical bike that wasn't immediately preceded by a swim. So you need maybe 10 or 20 grams per hour more on the bike than you would if you were just doing that bike in isolation. And even more than that, if you can tolerate more than that, it will benefit you for the run. So you might, if you're going to go do like a 56-mile bike ride, you might do great with 90 grams of carbs per hour in isolation. But in a 70.3, if you can tolerate 110 or 120 grams of carbs per hour, you'll be much better preserved for that run.
Wow, that pretty much. I always talk about warming up before the swim because I think obviously that swim anxiety is a huge piece, and I think you really just hit on something right there that could maybe solve a lot of problems for people. Not only getting warm, but like when you come out, you got to be ready and have the calories in you, so the fuel in you to go if you have to go. And so that's a massive discovery, right? Does that make sense? Am I reading that right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, if you're pre-race fueling doesn't stop at breakfast, you should definitely be fueling all the way up to swim start. And if you're on the slower side, I would even recommend taking a gel with you in an Ironman swim, not in a 70.3, but if you're going to be out in the water for like an hour and 20 minutes plus, you should totally have carbs with you.
That's yes, and especially you would think that wouldn't be that hard now. You see athletes already do it on one loop swims with like a gel in the top of their wetsuit, and I've always seen athletes do 5 in the 5 and 10K open water swim races. They'll have goos tucked into their top of their swims, their jammers, or they'll grab a bottle and take it quick and go because they just have to have it. And I think one of the biggest, as a coach, and we harp on this a lot, is athletes continuously blame the bike and the run on, or usually the run, right? Because it's the end of day. It's the last thing they did that they fell apart. But I think a lot of athletes go into these longer races and they immediately overexert combined with underfueling at the very, very, very beginning of the day, which puts you way behind the eight ball. And for a lot of people, especially if they're out there for, think about athletes who are out there in the swim fighting to finish for an hour and 25, 30, 40 minutes. I would argue, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there is no way to catch up after spending an hour and a half, hour and 40, dehydrating yourself to that manner and depleting your glycogen levels. You're going to start a 112-mile bike, not just behind the eight ball, but almost in a no-win situation from a fueling standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% accurate. And the run, as you said, is just the symptom. The crash, the bonk, the cramping, I have to walk at mile 6 of the marathon. That's totally the symptom, not the cause.
Wow. I want to kind of go into something that I heard you say, that heat acclimation training is more important than fitness if you go into a hot climate race. Is that right? And what would you think about that?
Yeah, if you are racing in a hot climate, you are a different athlete if you're not heat acclimatized. Yeah, totally. It's at least a 10% bump in fitness, and it can be a bigger hit to fitness if you're going from like the Pacific Northwest, where it's like on a hot day it's 75, perfect humidity, mostly shady, like it's just like that's hot for the Pacific Northwest. And then most of the year it's like 40, 50 degrees, you're shivering most of the time. And then you show up in Tennessee or Georgia and it's 90 and 80% humidity. Yeah, your fitness doesn't matter if you're not heat acclimatized.
I've got a very important question.
Okay.
What causes cramping?
Ooh, this is $1 billion question.
Yeah,
that's $1 billion industry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What causes cramping? Fatigue causes cramping. Fatigue.
Yep.
Dehydration can also cause it. Electrolyte issues can also cause it, but primarily it's fatigue. And the key piece for people to understand is fatigue is not just caused by some lack of fitness. I think people have, especially triathletes, have this sort of like internal critic voice, self-blame voice that I'm not fit enough. I'm not, I did something wrong. I went too hard. Maybe then that could very well be true. But mostly it's like this voice that says, I'm not fit enough. I didn't prepare enough. I don't have the work capacity and therefore I'm cramping. And that's might be true, but more likely it's an interplay of things that causes fatigue. And that interplay is usually involved in it's usually a lack of carbs, a lack of sodium, a lack of water, sometimes pacing issues, oftentimes pacing issues, and like over pushing the bike is like it's the stereotypical one that causes cramping on the run. But yeah, underfueling is a huge contributor to fatigue. And independently from that, yes, higher sodium intake throughout a race can stave off cramping even in a fatigued state.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
So a banana can't fix that, is what I'm hearing.
Unfortunately, no, the 200 milligrams or whatever of potassium in a banana does not fix a cramp. The quick fix for cramps is like an acid in your mouth, something like mustard, pickle juice, and people have long accredited the success of those things, the consumption of those things to fixing cramps to the electrolytes in those things and oftentimes the potassium in those things, and it's not that at all. There's a oral neural reflex that causes the relief of cramps when you put an acid in your mouth. So you could drink straight vinegar with no other electrolytes in it and it would do the same thing.
The apple cider vinegar, baby.
There you go. That's wild. And I stand behind that. Mustard is the most underrated condiment on the planet.
That's garlic.
I think we agree.
Go ahead, Mike.
Garlic. I just wanted to ask you this because I know a lot of triathletes, and you were just talking about how they blame themselves for a lot of things or whatever. And I wanted to go into this real quick because I just wonder what your thoughts are on, we train for Ironman and everything like that, and me included, we're always trying to cut a little bit of weight. Are there certain habits that, i.e. under hydration or whatever, or lack of sodium or anything like that, that might contribute to our difficulties in cutting, those last 10, 15, 20 pounds or whatever that we want to get rid of? Or is that too big of a topic?
Totally.
Oh, okay, cool.
Super common. There are some super common red flags I see in triathletes all the time. In folks like you, Mike, who have had the experience of drinking that gallon of water a day back in the day,
Mm-hmm.
that sort of sometimes lingers into later life with this proclivity to consume a little bit too much water. And what that does in really fit people is it can actually reduce blood pressure, and having hypotension or subclinical low blood pressure. So we're not talking about 40 or 80 over 40, you're in the hospital. We're talking about if you're running at 105 over 60 or 90 over 55, you are going to have the symptoms of hypotension. And one of the symptoms of hypotension is foggy brain, feeling fatigued, and that can be resolved by eating. You postprandial, meaning right after you eat, you get an increase in blood pressure, especially if you drink water and salt with your food. And so your brain knows, go to the kitchen and put something in your mouth if you feel like that. And that makes losing weight, trimming weight really hard. So if you're over drinking water and not including sodium, you can wash out sodium, drop your blood pressure, and end up basically feeding to fix the hypotensive symptoms that you have. And the real fix is consume a lot more sodium with your water. If you're that person who always runs at 110 over 70 at your best, and you feel great at 110 over 70, but sometimes you're at 100 over 60 and you feel bad, you need way more sodium throughout the day, 3,000 milligrams more sodium every day. It's not like adding 500 milligrams of sodium is going to fix that. So that's thing number one. Thing number two is people underfuel their training. So underfueling with carbs is the number one reason people get hypoglycemic at the end of their training session. The symptom of that is you walk into the kitchen and you're like, I'm going to put everything that's in the fridge out on the counter and I'm going to start eating it. Because, hypoglycemia drives hunger more strongly than just about anything.
Wow. That hasn't happened to me in one day.
The fix there is consume more carbs during training.
Wow.
So, man, this is a few more things. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I feel like we could go on for 4 hours. And this kind of segues into my next question, is, again, Mike and I see this a lot, and sometimes it's a really hard conversation to have with athletes. Is are you fueling and training to perform better, or are you training and fueling to lose weight, or maybe you're weight conscious, or maybe you have body image, things you're dealing with. And that was one of the things I know you highlighted on our Zoom call, which I thought was fantastic, was how prevalent eating disorders and other disorders very much like that are so prevalent in endurance sports, and can either athletes go into sports, like I did long time ago, trying to lose weight, and it kind of sticks with you, or it sometimes the endurance sports and the fueling and demands of it can kind of throw gasoline on a dormant fire for someone who is maybe on and off struggled with an eating disorder or anything like that. How does that play into the app that you made, and what were some of the things you consciously decided not to do because of that?
Yeah, 100%. That's super common in endurance sports, and a lot of the messaging we see in endurance sports definitely does that gasoline on a dormant flame thing for folks who have struggled with restrictive eating, disordered eating. We wanted to be really cognizant of that when we designed the app, because I think a lot of technology, a lot of apps, diet apps out there totally feed into that diet culture mindset where it's like, I've always got to be losing weight. I've always got to be on a cut diet. And a big role in my work before doing this app was I was a weight loss coach I've been a weight loss coach, still do help people with weight loss since 2015. And Yeah, it's a very fine line to walk with technology, not to encourage that idea of like, I need to follow a plan very rigidly to be successful. That's called orthorexia. You don't need to be hyper rigid in your plan to be successful nutritionally. You don't really even need to be hyper rigid from a training perspective. It certainly helps to be able to follow a plan that your coach lays out, a coach that you trust. But on the nutrition side, your body is really good at finding homeostasis, and so if you miss things by 10 or 20%, you can actually turn out totally all right in that training session and over time. The other thing that we found that was like totally heartwarming for both Michelle and I was that when you tell people with an app to fuel, like with X amount of carbs, Y amount of sodium, and Z amount of water, it gives folks license to feel like this is okay. I can actually, it gives them the license to actually fuel themselves well, rather than having that internal voice say, you don't deserve it, you didn't earn it, you didn't do enough power, you weren't running fast enough, this wasn't a hard enough or long enough workout, that doesn't deserve that gel. It's like, it has given people license, and it's like, I get choked up thinking about it because it can solve like serious problems. It's been really cool.
Wow. That's great stuff.
What do you mean, oops? We say
Oops,
shit
I
all the
know.
time on this podcast.
I know, whatever. I was just, I just got one really one or two questions here. One is, we've talked a lot about sodium and everything like that. Do you have a habitual power food that you could suggest that might be a good like practice to be in throughout the day? And two, I was watching the Zoom and I noticed that every once in a while you're hitting your bottle there. What do you put in that? Like just normal everyday kind of drinking?
Oh, good question. Let's see. Power food that I eat a lot of sandwiches as a CEO of a company and potentially. Well, I'll leave my. I have a very busy life on the family side, and I'll leave that off the air for now. But yeah, some positive things happening in the family. Really cool. Yeah, I don't have time for a whole lot of like specificity in my nutrition outside of training. So I that was another huge impetus for the creation of the app. I've got to save time. I need something that just does it for me. I need to stop whipping out my calculator to like figure out what I need for my training sessions. I just need to open an app and have it done for me. And then the rest of the time I use my intuition. I listen to my body. I will salt my food if I've had a heavy training session. I won't salt my food as much as if I haven't been sweating. I tend to run like 125/85 for blood pressure because I spent 10 years as a power athlete before I was an endurance athlete. So I've got like a big, strong heart and a whole bunch of muscle mass. My blood pressure runs a touch high, barely. So I don't necessarily need to be like slamming sodium. Michelle, on the other hand, has like, she's a little bit more slight of frame, 5'9", 140. She genuinely needs to consume like 5,000 milligrams of sodium a day just to like not be hypotensive. So she pretty much just salts everything. We use a lot of seasonings on our food, and she just adds salt to it. We don't really have any particular power food or staples. We do use the NutriBullet for like fruit smoothies, that sort of thing. Let's see. What was it? There was another half of your question.
Yeah. What are you drinking in your bottle right now?
Oh, actually, just water. Just water for me.
Okay.
If it were Michelle, though, it would be an electrolyte mix. Usually something like a pinch of G2 powder for flavor, or like Crystal Light for flavor, and then like half a teaspoon or a quarter teaspoon of sodium.
Wow.
Or a quarter teaspoon of salt.
So does she ever drink just straight water? This actually goes into my final question. Does it ever go straight into, or does she ever, because of how much she needs, does she ever drink just straight water?
In reality, yes. But I think that's just because she likes water.
Yeah. Man, I got one quick thing because I think it's really important. And I've heard this many years ago, that as we get older, we actually need more sodium, and higher blood pressure is better. Have you ever heard this, or am I just making this shit up? Because it's like, it's supposed to go, like you're saying.
No, you're 100% right.
Okay, good.
That's very true.
Because everyone, is on the high blood pressure medication, all that kind of stuff. And I just think that's a bad move. especially for people that get older and their veins get weaker or whatever, and the blood doesn't pump as much. So that's kind of where it all comes from. So I don't know if you have anything to say about that quick, but I just think it's a big, big thing.
Yeah, I do. I've read all of the literature on that because that was a huge concern for us when we built the app, because we have 65-year-olds, 70-year-olds using the app, and I wanted to be really certain that what we were recommending was not going to end up somebody in the hospital or cause long-term harm or anything like that. And yeah, for folks as they age, especially in like geriatrics, yes, slightly higher blood pressure, like 130 over 85, is probably better than the opposite. Something like 110 over 70 can be really problematic for elderly folks. Now, if you're at like 140 over 90, 145 over 95, that's where you start to be in like long-term kidney damage risk. And I have a nephrologist client actually who we've had really long conversations about that. And there's a J-shaped or a U-shaped curve where basically too low is bad for your health and too high is also bad for your health. So if you're 140 over 90, it's probably time to chat with a doctor about getting it down. If you are 130 over 85 and you're 65 years old, 70 years old, that might be optimal.
And who knew we would have been talking about blood pressure at the end of this podcast?
I know, right?
Like it's when you know. Before we segue, you can tell all the listeners about the app you developed quickly. I will just say for me, and again, because we have no affiliation or get any kickback. It's just generally I think a great simple thing. I think most athletes have gone and used their custom blends, because I think one thing I do want to remind all the athletes that are listening, and is not just from a nutritional standpoint, but from a food and beverage standpoint, is I think serving sizes are irrelevant for individuals. People look at a bag or a bottle or a canister of nutrition, or a serving size of a bar, and they think immediately you see this allows me to have this serving or that serving, when most, I would say 99 times out of 100, you need less or more, depending on what you're doing or what you've done. And so you can, in your app, you can obviously plug in what you've used, and I've always used EFS or EFS Pro. But I immediately tried out your, what do you call it, speed nectar or sweet nectar? I think probably speed nectar.
Speed nectar, yeah.
I guess sweet nectar would be kind of like too much of a double, but and I have been blown away how much I've loved it, because I before every run or ride, or even when I've been out playing tennis, like in the insane heat, you obviously don't have tennis in there, so I kind of like ad lib it. But all I need, and not only has it saved me money because I'm not buying $40 of a $40 can of EFS that has 20 servings in it. All I need is, I've been using raw sugar, sea salt, water. And I just get out my tablespoons and I get my cups for water, and then I do put a little splash of lemon juice in there. And I've absolutely loved it. It's been refreshing, and I have, again, and I'll speak for myself, was shocked at how much more fluid I needed to take in. But I also like the precision of it. But as we end, tell everybody that's listening, where to find your app, what exactly it does, as if you're going to go in and use it. Again, where to find it, the pricing on it, and promote yourself a little bit for a second.
I think you're asking the wrong guy to do self promotion live. I am the last thing that I am is a salesperson. I'm a sport physiologist first, and an app designer, strong second, because I care a lot about making things easy for folks. But yeah, it's available on both app stores. You can Google Saturday Pro Fuel and Hydration, or just like Saturday Fuel or something, and it'll come up on both app stores. Or you can check out our website at saturdaymorning.fit. And you can email me. I do all of our customer service still, and I'm going to do that as long as I can hang on. I'm hanging on by the skin of my teeth right now, but support at saturdaymorning.fit, and I'll answer your email. And we don't have any social media because we are still weighing the trade-offs of if Instagram is worthy of us, because Instagram has some serious trade-offs. What else? The app is $5.99 a month. We're going to implement an annual plan here soon, but $5.99 a month for now. And yeah, you sign up, you download the app, you go through a questionnaire. It's really easy. You just tap all the buttons. There's no like long forms to fill out. It's pretty easy. Then you get into the app and you add your activities, and it tells you what to put in your bottles. And you can use gels, chews, solids. You can add custom foods. You can swap the units if you like metric or if you like standard SI units. It's all pretty easy. Just tap around and you'll figure it out pretty quick, I think. But email me, support@SaturdayMorning.fit if you have any questions at all.
I figured it out, so it can't be that hard.
That's awesome.
All right. Well, does that wrap it up here, Coach?
Yeah, I mean, you said everything I was going to say. If it's simple enough for you, it's simple, and you and I, it's simple enough for everyone else listening. It is. It's simple, but it's detailed, and I think that's a great way to kind of keep things so you don't get lost anything further. Alex, we really, really appreciate you giving us the time today. I know you're super busy, both in and out of work these days, so really appreciate your time. And again, hope all of our listeners found as much value in the conversation as we did, and especially after our Zoom call. And then we'll find the same amount of value that we found using app. Again, we all spend an enormous amount of time training and with coaches and flying to races and hotels and entry fees, and so many times athletes get caught up or fall short or get frustrated in and out of training solely not because they're not putting the work in, because they don't know what to take in while they're doing the work or while they're racing. So this is a great option for you. So again, check out the app, Saturday app, and support Alex. Great guy, great app. And then as always, we love you guys. We appreciate you. If you need anything from us, you know where we are. Our website, c26triathlon.com, and is our one-stop shop for all things coaching, camps, and community. If you're looking at participating in some of our camps or this year or next year, please click on the camp tab. Find the camp that interests you the most. If you have any questions about those, you can email Summer, c26operations@gmail.com. If you're interested in learning more about our coaching, you can click on that tab and find the coach that's right for you. And as always, if you need Mike, he's available, crushingiron@gmail.com. Or if you need anything from me, c26coach@gmail.com.
All right, Alex. Thanks, buddy. I appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
See ya.
Appreciate you guys having me on. You guys have been incredibly generous having me on this show, and thank you everybody for listening to me ramble on about sodium and carbs. Yeah, truly my pleasure.
Love it, man. Have a good weekend.
All right, yeah.